Hi guys, so as some of you might know from my sticker art, I use Uni Poscas a lot and they're pretty much my favourite type of paint pen to use when I do my art. And pretty much I haven't managed to find any good tutorials online about how to use these pens. And I absolutely love them and I think they've got so much potential. So I just decided I'd put this tutorial together to show you like a bunch of techniques that I use, just to give you some ideas of what you could possibly do with them. I'm not saying this is everything, but here's just some starting points that just might help you guys. Cool, so let's get started with how to open a new Posca pen. So it will come in this little shrink wrap, which if you just turn like that, you can just pull the wrap off. And then what the instructions on the side tell you to do is they tell you to shake the pen and then depress the nib. So you can see currently this nib is white as there is no ink in it. With my tips about shaking the pen, I'd say give it a couple of shakes. You can feel the ink is slightly thick. Once you feel it flowing, that's enough, guys. No need to press it anymore. Now, when you press down this nib, one thing you'll do is if you press it too much, you're going to round off this end. So what I'd say is try to press it just a couple of times, like this. And what you'll start to see is you'll start to see the ink coming out here. Once it does this, just start holding it down for a bit, because the ink will actually feed its way through the nib, and there we go, you can see the ink has found its way out, and that saves you having to press the nib down as much. And there we go, pen's working. If you press the nib a bit too much, you'll probably find that your pen is going to start blobbing, and you're going to get a bit more ink than you wanted. The only way really to deal with that is just keep running the pen out. One thing to definitely not do is to shake it. If you shake it now, currently you can get ink coming out the end, it makes an absolute mess, so please don't do that. One thing I'd recommend you guys getting is a little beaker with some water and a couple of bits of paper just ripped up. It can be squares or whatever, just some little bits of paper. I like using lined paper as it's kind of shiny so it doesn't absorb water too much, and I'm going to explain why you want these later. So let's get started with a pen. Just show you normal green pen like this. And as you can see, now an interesting thing is I can come in and I can smudge like this. Now let's compare this to, I've got a crink marker here. This is a solvent based marker. I'm going to show you how next to it. First you can hear the difference in the nib. And now when I smudge this, we're actually getting a lot more smudge off that. But the smudge isn't as wide. Now, here comes the water. If I get a little dab of water on my finger and bring it in on the Posca, you'll see that I'm able to smudge like this and create this sort of watercolour effect. However, now, coming in on the crink, you'll see that there is absolutely no smudge. There's a tiny bit, but that's pretty much the green coming off my finger. And this is a really nice technique that I love to use. Obviously, if you want a really quick drying pen, then crink or any other solvent-based paint pens are great. But one thing I really love about Uni Poscas is how slow they are in their drying, and the fact that before you've let them dry completely, you can keep wetting them and adding to it. Cool, so this technique, which I want to show you, is where you use a piece of paper like a paintbrush. So I'm just going to use a red Posca this time. I'm just going to scribble a nice amount onto this piece of paper, and now turning it upside down and pressing, you can see that I can apply some red just like this. And if I come back, add a bit more, I can come back and add a couple more of these smudges. And this technique can be really nice as a background technique for creating textures or coming on top of, like this green section here, you see I've added a texture on top. So again, there's another really nice use for the paper. So let's get on to the next technique. So for this technique, I want to show you how to mix two pens, and you can actually use your hand to do this. So as I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned, Uni Poscas are actually water-based, which means they're perfectly safe to apply to your skin. So as you can see here, I'm just going to apply this yellow here, and then apply the red next to it here. Now just using dab of water, I'm just going to mix the two together. You can see I produce this orange, which I can then just apply to the page like this. You can see I can just paint with this orange. Obviously it's slightly limiting in the fact that this is all the paint I'm going to get. I can apply a bit more water, add a bit more, but it's of course going to be thinner, do be aware of that. But I can of course just come back in with these pens, just remix and just keep applying, and this technique will keep your nibs of your pens clean. Obviously if you're not keen with mixing on your hands, I mean this can get pretty messy, you can of course mix on the paper. So you can just apply, let's just do the red and the yellow again. Just going to get a little dab of water just to help the mixing. Going to mix it up like that, and then using the technique I just described, we can try to smudge out. Personally, I'm not a massive fan of this one, as unless you're using this for a background technique, the actual spreading of the colour once it's on there is not great. I mean, we could always come in with a bit of water again and try to spread it out, but we're getting really quite a thin colour at this point. In this technique, I'm going to explain how I can merge one colour, here a yellow, into a red. And this you could use on any technique, for example, if you wanted to create a sunset. So just like painting, if you come in and gradually smudge this in, being really careful and working with the water, you can see that I can create this gradual change. Just getting a bit dry there. I can get this gradual change in colour, going from one colour to another. Now you see I've lost a bit of red here, so I'm going to add a tiny bit of red back in, and I'm just going to work this back. Work this back in until I get the desired shade that I want. And there we go, we've got a pretty rich sunset effect where we've gone through the yellow into the red. Now one thing you might have observed off the back of this last technique was these little pieces that are building up that look a bit like eraser sharpenings. And what this is it's actually the top layer of the paper starting to disintegrate. So I'm just going to apply a lot more water, and you're going to see what starts to happen is I get this more and more pieces coming off. So do be aware that if you can see all these pieces here just coming off the paper, do be aware that as you add water to the paper is going to get soggy and it will start to dissolve. So do be careful the amount of paint or water you add before allowing it to dry. So you need to allow it to dry, then add more water, then allow it to dry again. However, there will reach a point when the paper will not be able to take any more water and it will just start giving off these flecks. So once you do start to see this flecking, do start to just take it easy, because otherwise you're going to endanger yourself going through the paper. Okay, so when we draw with this pen, you can see when I draw slowly, paint comes out at a really even rate and we get a really nice fill. However, if we draw quickly, you can see we start to get these gaps. And this technique you can really play around with. So once you get good at learning, you might want to have this thinning out effect, and then you can thicken and thin. So you can really play around with the speed that you move to get these really, really thin strokes, if you can see these here. Or I can go for a really thick shading. So play around with the speed at which you move the marker over the paper, depending on how thick you want this shading to be. Cool. So let's say you've been drawing in red and you, by accident, smudged your yellow over it, and you can see this yellow is now drawing a bit orange. Don't worry. A really easy way to deal with this is just keep drawing out on all sides with your pen until it returns the original colour. Personally, I mean, you can get some really cool effects by playing around and smudging on top, but I would say you waste a lot of paint trying to clean your markers off afterwards. So I'd say stay with just the mixing techniques I taught you earlier on in this tutorial, because you can really see how much paint I've just wasted just to clean off that marker. Finally, I'd like to introduce you to probably my favourite technique, which is smudging once you've drawn. So this would involve a piece of paper and a pen, and when you're using this pen, make sure you've got quite a lot of ink coming out. So go quite slowly so you've got enough paint on the page, and then come in and just smudge. And this will really matter that you need quite a lot of paint on the page. But as you see here, you get this lovely gradient because I put quite a thick amount of paint here. I'm going to show you if I do it too thinly when I come into smudge, I don't quite get as nice a gradient and I start getting holes in the texture where you can see I've ripped the paint away. So really put a nice amount of paint and then come in and smudge and you'll get this more even texture across. And this texture I absolutely love for working with backgrounds. It's one of my favourite techniques for backgrounds, and just like before you can even come in and you can play around with some water in some places and just like add a bit of a wash if you want. Cool guys, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I put a lot of time and thought into some of the techniques I presented here, so I really hope that some of you guys can get something from these. If you have any questions about any of the techniques or anything about using Poscas, then please let me know. And that's pretty much it guys. If this video was useful, please do like it and share it with your friends. And that's pretty much it guys. So, peace out.